Chapter 13. The Party Thief. Mrs. Mise was very upset, and she was on the verge of tears. "This is so bad," she said. "So very bad." Nancy patted the woman's hands. "Let's try not to take this warning too seriously. I think that whoever has been writing these notes is a coward. If not, he would have done something more drastic by this time." Mr. Drew knew that Nancy was trying to make their hostess feel better. He doubted, however, that Nancy could take the matter so lightly. He was right. Secretly, Nancy was greatly worried. She had a feeling that her adversary desperately wanted to frighten her. Nancy asked Mr. Mise if he would try to find the porter who had brought him the note. "I'll go with you," she added. Together they hurried to the lobby of the hotel and walked past the porters who were seated on a bench in a little niche. Mr. Mise shook his head. "I don't see the young man here," he declared. "Maybe he was from another hotel." Nancy asked, "Did he wear the same uniform as these men?" Mr. Mise nodded. "That means he could not be from another hotel." Suddenly, a smile crossed his face. "Here he comes now." A young man was walking out of an elevator. Mr. Mise and Nancy went up to him, and the two Japanese conversed for a few minutes. Then Mr. Mise translated for Nancy. "The porter says that a little boy arrived with the note, then left the hotel. He does not know whether the child came from the street or whether he is staying at the hotel." In other words, someone probably gave him a tip to bring the note to the porter, so the real sender couldn't be traced, Nancy reasoned. Very clever. "Whom do you suspect the sender is?" Mr. Mise asked. "Benny Caputi. He either followed us or happened to see us here. If the latter is true, he was in the hotel. In either case, he might still be here." "And you would like to find him," Mr. Mise said with a smile. "But it is a large place, and you cannot search the rooms." "I know," Nancy said, "but Benny would be where the jewelry is." "Which is at the reception," Mr. Mise completed her sentence. "Right. Let's go back there and tell Dad." When Mr. Drew and Mrs. Mise heard about what had happened, they offered to look around for a man who matched Caputi's description. Nancy and her father went off together. The Mises walked in a different direction. Presently, Nancy noticed a short, black-haired man who, although he was not dressed in a gray suit, was obviously American or European like Caputi. He was walking quietly among the guests when Mr. Mise appeared on the scene and took her arm. "Nancy, I would like you to meet Mr. Shopwell. He is president of an American bank in Tokyo." Nancy managed to hide her surprise and shook hands with Mr. Shopwell. How glad she was that she had said nothing. The Drews and Mr. Mise spoke to the bank president for a while, then continued their sleuthing. Nancy saw another man some distance away who was dressed in black dinner clothes and fit the description of Benny the Slippery One. Suddenly she stopped short and grabbed her father's arm. "Look," she said, "that man! He's snipping a pearl necklace right off that woman's neck." The young detective and her father made their way through the crowd to close in on the thief, who had slipped the necklace into his right pants pocket. He was walking away from the woman with quick steps. When Nancy and her father caught up to him, they each took an arm. "We saw you steal that woman's necklace," Nancy accused him. "That is a lie," the thief cried out. "You can't deny it," Mr. Drew said. "The necklace is in your right pants pocket." The suspect stepped a few paces away. "You are wrong," he insisted, still backing up further. "You are wrong. I'll prove it to you." With that, he turned the pocket inside out. Several coins fell to the floor, but that was all. The pearl necklace was not among them. Nancy and her father were stunned. It seemed like the work of a magician. The Drews had to agree that the necklace was indeed not there, and apologized as the man angrily pushed the pocket back into its place. Then he picked up his coins from the floor. "But I saw you take it," Nancy insisted. "I'm sure I saw you take it. But if I was wrong, I'm sorry." The man nodded and turned to leave. The Drews walked away quickly before there might be a scene. "I can't understand what happened," Mr. Drew said tensely. "We both watched him take that necklace." "I have an idea," Nancy spoke up. "Maybe there was a hole in his pocket. The pearls fell to the floor and were picked up by an accomplice. Remember, there were a few people between us and that man, so we might not have seen the necklace drop." "You're right," her father agreed. "Let's go back to the spot and see what we can learn." By the time they reached the area where the theft had occurred, the owner had discovered her loss. She was Japanese and began exclaiming in bitter tones in her language. The Drews did not understand what she was saying, but noticed another guest hurrying up to her. She was an American who apparently understood some Japanese. However, she spoke to the woman in English. "I saw a necklace on the floor a few minutes ago. A Japanese woman picked it up, slipped it into her purse, and walked off. I assumed it belonged to her." Mr. Drew whispered to his daughter, "You were right about the hole in the thief's pocket." And the woman who picked up the necklace was indeed an accomplice. Nancy was annoyed at herself for letting the thief slip through her fingers so easily. Why had she not looked for a hole in his pocket when he turned it inside out? She spoke to the guest who had watched the person pick up the pearls from the floor. "Would you recognize her if you saw her again?" "I believe I would," the American replied. "She wore a very pretty kimono and carried a matching handbag." "Would you mind pointing her out to me?" When the woman hesitated, Nancy added, "I'm trying to catch a thief, and I believe he's at this party." The American consented, while Mr. Drew asked other guests if any of their jewelry was missing. Suddenly there was a hubbub as one woman after another discovered that their gems had been stolen. Bracelets, necklaces, pins, and hair ornaments were gone. A valuable ruby and diamond necklace was reported by a friend of the bride to have been stolen. Mr. Mise notified the police, and a number of officers arrived in a few minutes to search for the thief. All guests cooperated and permitted themselves to be searched. A young officer asked Nancy for her purse. She smiled. "I don't have one with me," she said. "I put my comb into the bottom of my kimono sleeve, as I understand Japanese women often do." "Then I must examine your sleeves," the officer said. He found nothing in the left one, then reached into the right. To Nancy's horror, he pulled out a gorgeous ruby and diamond necklace. End of chapter 13.